Welcome back to Omoshiroi Recap. Today, I will recap Lord Marksman and Vanadis. The story begins with a war between the Brune Kingdom and the Zhcted Kingdom. The main character of this anime is a nobleman named Tigrevurmud Vorn, a soldier in the Brune Kingdom. Then, a nobleman named Zhcted came to see Tigre. He really underestimated Tigre because he could only use a bow. Then, the battle began, but the Brune Kingdom's army was defeated. Fortunately, Tigre was still alive and saw a powerful female knight. That's when he intended to defeat her using his arrows. Although he managed to knock out 2 warriors, he was cornered because he had run out of arrows.
Eleonora Viltaria. お前は今から私のものだ.
The female knight was named Eleonora Viltaria, and Eleonora wanted to make Tigre her own. Tigre was taken to the royal palace of Zhcted as a prisoner. Then Elen asked Tigre's nobles for a huge ransom of money. Tigre officially became Elen's property if they did not pay the money within 50 days. After that, Tigre was asked to show his archery skills, but Tigre didn't want to, so he became underestimated by other soldiers. Suddenly, there was a criminal who attacked Elen.
Arifar.
Because he intended to escape from there, Tigre immediately paralyzed his leg using his archery skills. Seeing that made them all so surprised because Tigre's abilities were extraordinary. After that, a female knight named Limalicia explained that Elen liked Tigre's archery skills, so Elen wanted to make him her own. Elen also wanted to show Tigre's ability to all the soldiers so that they would know that Tigre's ability was incredible. Also, during the previous battle, Elen's army numbered only 5,000, while the Brune Kingdom numbered 25,000. But Elen's army easily won the war in half a day. This was because many troops from the Brune Kingdom fled like cowards after the death of Prince Rignaz. So Elen also slaughtered the cowards who retired from the battlefield. But Elen was amazed when she met Tigre because Tigre bravely fought her alone. So Elen was attracted to Tigre and offered him to serve her and pay homage like royalty. However, Tigre refused because he had an Alsace region where he lived. Then, there was a knight named Rurik who had underestimated Tigre before. He felt guilty for his actions, so he apologized and shaved off all his hair. Not only that, some of the servants there were also amazed by Tigre's abilities. However, at night, Tigre's friend came, and he said that Tigre's territory wanted to be attacked by the Vanadis nobles. After hearing this, Tigre intended to go there, but Elen stopped him. The head of the Vanadis noble family, Felix Eren, asked Zhcted to attack Tigre's noble territory using 2 dragons to seize control of the territory. On the other hand, Tigre, who wanted to return to his territory, was stopped by Elen. Elen said that Tigre would die if he went alone, and that's why Elen wouldn't let Tigre go there. Then Tigre begged Elen to borrow some of his troops. Hearing that made Elen laugh. Unexpectedly, Elen would accept Tigre's request. Still, in return, Tigre had to hand over the territory's power to her. To protect his territory, Tigre accepted that Elen's troops would fight against the nobles of the Brune Kingdom. Then they headed there with 1,000 troops, while the enemy troops numbered 3,000, and they even used 2 dragons in the battle. On the other hand, Tigre's servant Tita helped the residents to immediately evacuate to a safe place. Unfortunately, when Zhcted's army arrived in the city, the residents were no longer there. Zhcted decided to head to Tigre's house and met Tita, who was waiting for Tigre's arrival. Seeing a beautiful girl alone made him horny and wanted to rape her.
Tigre-sama.
Huh?
At that moment, Tigre shot Zhcted's rotten hand with an arrow. Thanks to that, Tita was saved, but suddenly, someone intended to kill Tita. Fortunately, Tigre was able to defeat that person very quickly. Since his bow was destroyed, Tigre used his father's black bow during the battle. Moments later, they managed to defeat Zhcted's troops in the city, but the battle was still not over, and the enemy troops were still left with 27,000 and 2 dragons. Despite being outnumbered, Elen and Tigre will fight them on the front lines. Elen's wind sword can easily deflect all arrows from the enemy. At the same time, Tigre counters his opponent's attacks using his arrows until he manages to paralyze his enemy. Then, an earth dragon appears there. At the same time, Limalicia's army is ready to help. so that Elen can launch her ultimate attack on the dragon. In the end, the dragon was defeated in one attack. That way, they were superior in the battle and even made Xion so scared and wanted to escape from the war. Unfortunately, Xion could not escape because Elen's army with Tigre had arrived before him. Then Xion challenged Tigre to a duel with him and happily accepted the challenge. Tigre used a bow, while Xion used a spear. Unexpectedly, Tigre was able to pierce Xion's shield and make him cry in fear. Xion immediately ran away from there using the sky dragon. At the same time, his black bow asked Tigre to attack the dragon. Not only that, Elen's sword gave its power to Tigre. In the end, Xion and his dragon were defeated, and they won the battle. After the battle, Tigre lived a peaceful life, and then Elen was asked to return to the capital of the kingdom of Zhcted. On the other hand, Felix ordered the Assassin's Guild to kill Tigre after their defeat in the previous battle. Not only that, Felix also asked the 7 War Maidens to face Elen later. Elen met with the king of the kingdom of Zhcted, and the king became angry because Elen had fought the previous battle without the king's consent. Then Sophia Obertas came to meet the king. Sophia tried to calm the king from his anger. Then, there was also another war maidens named Ludmilla Lurie. The two of them always argued about the softness of their boobs, but Sophia's boobs, which were bigger than them, could calm their fights. After that, Sophia explained that Ludmilla's family ancestors were related to the Thenardier nobles. Sophia also advised Elen to be careful because there was a possibility that Elen would face Ludmilla later. On the other hand, Tigre planned to fight the Thenardier nobles, so he traveled to seek help from other nobles to win the battle against the Thenardier nobles. Then Tigre met Elen again. Elen also explained that there were 7 war maidens in the kingdom of Zhcted. Also, the Thenardier nobles can borrow the power of the 7 war maidens as long as they can give rewards to the kingdom of Zhcted. After that, Ludmilla suddenly came to meet them, and Ludmilla said that she was the one who would provide assistance to the Thenardier nobles later. Then, when they headed somewhere, they were instead confronted by the Assassin's Guild. And although Ludmilla could defeat the criminals, Limalicia was poisoned by a snake bite. Seeing this, Tigre quickly helped her by sucking her boobs to remove the poison. After that, they rushed to the nearest town to cure Limalicia. Thanks to the help from Tigre earlier, Limalicia survived death and was able to recover quickly. Before continuing their journey, they relaxed, wandering around the market. Still, Elen became jealous because Tigre was always kind to Ludmilla. Unfortunately, their relationship could not go well because Ludmilla intended to attack their troops, so they would fight each other on the battlefield. Although the first battle ended evenly, Ludmilla had the upper hand in the second battle because Ludmilla's troops managed to capture the castle in the snowy mountains. It became difficult for Elen's troops and Tigre to do battle there. However, Tigre had a plan to overcome this. Tigre disguised himself using a bear cloak to find a safe way to approach the castle. Unexpectedly, Tigre met Ludmilla there. Fortunately, Tigre used a bear cloak so Ludmilla did not recognize him. They spent time together at night. At that moment, Ludmilla felt calmer and more cheerful when she was with Tigre. Then Ludmilla told him she was forced to help the Thenardier nobles in battle. Ludmilla didn't like them, but her ancestors were related to the Thenardier nobles, so Ludmilla had no choice but to help them even though she didn't want to fight her own friends. After that, they went their separate ways. Thanks to his meeting with Ludmilla, Tigre found another way to get to the castle. However, Ludmilla had already strengthened the defenses when they wanted to attack the castle. Then Tigre wanted to borrow the power from Elen's wind sword to destroy the castle gate. They met Ludmilla, and Elen immediately fought against her. But suddenly, a member of the Assassin's Guild wanted to attack Ludmilla, knowing that Tigre immediately protected her and stopped the assassin's attack. After seeing his archery skills, Ludmilla was convinced that the bear man before was Tigre. Since Tigre had saved her, Ludmilla would give him a gift. Tigre also asked Ludmilla to be a neutral party so that Ludmilla would not take anyone's side when Tigre fought against the Thenardier nobles later. Ludmilla also accepted Tigre's request so that they could focus on fighting the Thenardier nobles in the battle later. However, the Thenardier nobility took advantage of King Brune to send an invincible Black Knight into battle named Roland. Knowing that their opponent this time was powerful, Tigre and the others tried to increase their combat power. When Tigre wanted to relax by the river, a tiny dragon belonging to Elen suddenly appeared, which made Tigre fall into the river. At the same time, Sophia tried to catch the little dragon but instead fell with her naked body pressed against Tigre. Elen was also there and saw the two of them having fun. After Sophia explained the reason for her arrival, it turned out that she was bringing a message from the kingdom that Tigre's noble status had been removed by King Brune. Tigre was considered a rebel for bringing in other royal troops. Not only that, Sophia also explained about the other war maidens. Elizabeth had a good relationship with Thenardier. Valentina was far from the Brune kingdom, and Olga was traveling somewhere unknown. The last war maiden was Sasha, but he was unwell. Furthermore, it was shown that the royal troops led by Roland were heading to their place. Roland was ordered by the king to eradicate the rebels, namely Tigre, so they were forced to fight against Roland. During the battle, Elen had difficulty fighting Roland. Fortunately, Tigre managed to get Elen away from there and even paralyzed Roland's horse. Unfortunately, Tigre was severely injured by Roland's attack. Knowing this, Sophia helped hold back the troops so Elen could safely take Tigre. After successfully buying time for Elen, Sophia left immediately. Then, it was shown that Felix and Gainlon had controlled the king so they could send the royal army with Roland to the battlefield. Then, one of Tigre's friends, Masha's, managed to get into King Brune's palace. It was seen that the king was mentally affected after the death of the prince during the previous battle. Felix took advantage of the situation to control the king and was able to give orders to the royal troops. Tigre regained consciousness, and then his black bow asked Tigre to go somewhere. Tigre and Titta immediately headed to the place the black bow wanted. They arrived at a mysterious ruin. While entering there, Titta's consciousness was taken over by the goddess of darkness and death. Then, the goddess would give her power to Tigre as long as Tigre could launch an arrow at Titta. Tigre confidently accepted the challenge and poured his power into the arrow. The arrow shattered before it hit Titta. Seeing that, the goddess recognized the determination of Tigre and he gained power from the goddess. After that, Tigre rushed to the battlefield. On the other hand, Elen, Sophia, and the others went into battle and they faced Roland again. Sophia used her power to be able to help Elen as she fought with Roland. Despite being hit by Elen's ultimate attack, Roland unexpectedly survived the attack. Then Tigre came to meet them. At the same time, Roland had doubts about the king's previous orders and began to suspect that someone was influencing the king. Even so, the battle continued. Tigre would fight Roland this time. Roland admits his defeat for the first time after being hit by a powerful attack from Tigre. In the end, Tigre's army with Elen won the battle. After the battle, Roland intended to meet King Brune at the palace. At the same time, Elen was asked to return to the royal capital of Zhcted. There was news that the residence of the war maiden Sasha had been attacked by other war maidens. Since Elen was friends with Sasha, Elen would head there to protect Sasha's residence. When Roland headed to the royal palace, he was trapped by Gainlon in a room with 1,000 deadly bees. In the end, Roland died standing up. After hearing about Roland's death, Felix was very angry with Gainlon. Roland is the strongest knight of the Brune kingdom, and his death will weaken the combat power of the Brune kingdom. So the Muezzanil kingdom, who knew about it, began to attack the borders of the Brune kingdom. They used the opportunity to take over the Brune kingdom. Meanwhile, Tigre considered his next plan to face all enemies and protect his territory. Before his death, Roland had left Durandal's weapon to Tigre as proof that Roland trusted Tigre completely. Tigre took his troops to reconnoiter the enemy forces a few days later. Then he saw that there was a woman who was being chased there. Tigre rescued her and brought her to safety. Next came the first battle against Muezzina's army. Thanks to their previous reconnaissance, Tigre's army was able to win that battle easily, so they managed to reduce the enemy's combat power. Then Tigre's troops decided to go head-to-head with the enemy troops, and the enemy leadership greatly underestimated Tigre's archery skills. Tigre also wanted to prove his prowess by shooting his head from afar. Since the enemy leader had been defeated, they could win the battle easily and rescue the captive Brune population. Unfortunately, 3,000 enemy main troops were still heading there, which made it difficult for Tigre because they were exhausted. Fortunately, Ludmilla came along and was willing to help Tigre's troops. In the past, Elen and Ludmilla always fought, but a war maiden named Sasha came to stop their quarrels. Sasha's abilities are stronger than both, so they respect Sasha very much. A few years later, Sasha suddenly suffered from a disease and made herself paralyzed. Then Elen met Sasha in her territory. Sasha explained that the troops of the Princess of the Thunderstorm named Elizabeth intended to attack her territory. Because Sasha could not enter the battlefield, she could only ask for help from Elen to fight Lisa. Tigre, on the other hand, managed to survive the battle thanks to Ludmilla's help. Ludmilla and her army will help Tigre, but in return, Tigre must show his strength to destroy the previous castle gate. Unfortunately, Tigre could not show this because he still had not mastered this power. Even so, the cooperation with Ludmilla went smoothly. Next, the battle between Elen's and Lisa's troops began. Elen and Lisa clashed their strength. Even though their power was equally strong, fortunately, Elen managed to beat Lisa back. Lisa decided to withdraw her troops because her task of only separating Elen from Tigre had been temporarily completed. Not only that, Lisa said that the Thenardier nobles and Gainlon nobles had begun mobilizing their troops in the kingdom of Brune. Even the Muezzin kingdom's troops were heading to the Brune kingdom, so Lisa advised Elen to head there immediately. They also made a truce agreement with Lisa for 1 year. Elen accepted it as long as Lisa apologized to Sasha first. In the end, the battle ended peacefully. After that, Elen and her troops went straight to Tigre's place while Ludmilla and Tigre discussed strategies in the battle against Muezzin's troops. Muezzin's troops numbered 40,000 and were divided into 7 groups. Their troops were exhausted after the previous battle, so they had to defeat all the enemies in one battle. Tigre and Ludmilla managed to deceive the enemy troops as the battle began. Thanks to that, they could defeat one group of enemy troops. However, the enemy commander, Curies, ordered 3 groups of troops to surround them. In contrast, the rest surrounded the mountains where the people were. Even Curies decided to stay away from the battlefield to avoid Tigre's deadly arrow attacks. Ludmilla and Tigre had to defend themselves against the overwhelming army. Fortunately, reinforcements came, and were 5,000 troops ready to take orders from Tigre. Not only that, 3,000 troops led by Mashes also headed to the battlefield. After learning about this, Curies decided to withdraw his troops from there. Having been cornered, the Curies decided to return to their kingdom. He would also spread the information that Tigre's combat ability exceeded Roland, the Black Knight. The information spread so quickly that Tigre earned the nickname Silvrash, a person who can shoot stars. The battle was won by Tigre's army so they could rest in peace there.
Eleonora.
Elen suddenly came to see them the next day, but she saw Ludmilla sleeping with Tigre. Ludmilla even said that she wanted to take Tigre away from Elen, and that angered Elen. While Tigre was sleeping, Valentina suddenly appeared to meet him there. Tigre unconsciously moved his hand to squeeze Valentina's soft boobs. Because Tita was heading there to wake Tigre up, Valentina immediately left. Then, a girl who was saved by Tigre before was Prince Regin. She was disguised as a man because a queen who could only give female offspring would be executed in the Brune kingdom. So Regin disguised herself as a man for the queen's safety. Regin wants to go to a secret place that can only be opened by the royal family so that Regin can prove that she is royalty. However, that place is Artesium, the noble Gainlon's residence. Although it is hazardous for a battle to occur, they will still go there. On the other hand, Felix has prepared 5 dragons so that he can win the battle against Tigre later. Meanwhile, the Gainlon nobles had learned about Regin's whereabouts, which is why he was also preparing to attack. While Tigre's troops were on their way to Artesium, they were suddenly intercepted by Felix's troops. Elen and Ludmilla were forced to fight the 5 dragons. Although they managed to defeat 3 dragons, 2 were stronger, so they had difficulty defeating them. After that, the 2 armies decided to retreat temporarily to rest and reorganize the strategy. Elen and Ludmilla discussed the dragon's weaknesses and decided to fight the dragon again. Meanwhile, Tigre focused on fighting Felix's army alone. When the battle resumed, they already knew that attacks using the power of their weapons would not work against the dragon. But ordinary attacks could penetrate the dragon's defenses, so Elen and Ludmilla did not use the power of their weapons and attacked the dragon with ordinary slashes. Thanks to that, they managed to defeat the dragon thanks to teamwork. Due to the defeat of the previous dragon, Felix's army had to retreat first. Tigre also used the opportunity to rest because it was already daytime. Elen tried to wake him up with murderous intentions. Feeling in danger, Tigre immediately woke up and counterattacked Elen. Then, they intended to continue their journey to Artesium to prove to all the residents that Regin was royalty. Regin explained that there were 3 entrances to the underground of the city. One of them is in a small temple close to their location. Knowing that, they immediately headed there. However, while tracing the underground path, they suddenly met Felix. So there was a battle in that place, and Elen fought each other against Felix while Tigre fought a strong knight there. When the battle was getting fierce, suddenly the place collapsed. They all decided to retreat, but the knight intended to kill Tigre there instead. Fortunately, Batra saved Tigre and even managed to survive the ruins. Unfortunately, Batra died because he was hit by an attack from the knight. Even though he could no longer be saved, Batra was happy because he could protect Tigre for the last time. In the end, Batra died without any regrets at all, seeing that Tigre accidentally awakened his hidden power. Thanks that Tigre managed to get out of the ruins. Seeing where they were, Elen immediately brought them back to the headquarters. After regaining consciousness from his stupor, Tigre became very sad because Batra was a precious figure for him. Elen tried to encourage Tigre, who was sad despite losing many comrades in battle. Elen asked Tigre to maintain his identity and his determination to protect his birth territory from enemies. It made Tigre cheerful and excited again. The next day, the kingdom's prime minister met Tigre, and he already knew about Regin. Then, he explained that the king had begun to come to his senses. Also, the prime minister was convinced that the king had been poisoned by Gainlon's nobles. Then he asked Regin to see the king immediately because his life would not last long. Knowing this, Tigre decided to have a final battle against Felix's army. At the time of the battle, Tigre's army managed to gain the upper hand. They met Felix there, and Tigre intended to use his power to kill Felix and his entire army to avenge Batra's death. But Elen stopped Tigre as he was about to be overcome by his hatred. The slap managed to bring Tigre back to his senses. Then Tigre dueled with Felix, and he would only use 1 arrow. With the power of the wind accompanying his arrow, he managed to defeat Felix with 1 strike. So the battle ended with Tigre's troops and Elen and Ludmilla winning. On the other hand, the nobleman Gainlon decided to leave the Brune kingdom, even though he was amazed by Tigre's archery skills. Unexpectedly, Valentina was also there, and she helped take Gainlon away from the kingdom. After that, Tigre and Regin were greeted with great fanfare by the residents of the royal capital. Then they headed to the king's place because Tigre had saved the kingdom and his daughter. The king granted Tigre's request. Not only that, the king also gave Tigre the title of Knight of the Moon Lumiere. Hearing that made the prime minister so surprised because receiving the title of Knight of the Moon would make him a candidate for the next king. After all that, Tigre decided to stay in Zhcted and enjoy a peaceful life there. However this story ends, remember to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.